let's go over to our wide receiver rankings. As always, I think, do we do 10? I have to check. I don't think we did like a full 10 last year. I think we just did 5, right?
We did.
We did a full 10?
We did 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm mixing my years
actually,
up. I'll
now
double
I'm
check.
questioning
I'll double
it.
check while you go through yours.
No, we did 10. We did 10 because I remember I looked at my list last year and I remember seeing like some guys that I left off at the bottom.
Yeah. So I got both our top 10s pulled up. And I'll mention after we each go. I'll let you go first, though, for your top 10 for this year. So go ahead, John. Who are your top 10 wide receivers heading into 2023?
All right. My current top 10. Number one. Oh, well, not number one. We'll start with number 10. At number 10, I have Terry McLaurin. I really think that Terry is truly a premier talent in the NFL. And it kind of sucks because it feels like he's getting like the early career DeAndre Hopkins treatment where he's just never really had a quarterback and he still produces, he still performs. And that's why it was just kind of impossible for me to leave him off the top 10. I think that he could be even higher if you paired him with a top quarterback. I mean, a lot of the guys on the list that I'm going to talk about above him, I think, actually, no, literally, I'm looking at the list. Every single one of them going into this year, some of them have had some QB changes, but every single one of them have played with quarterbacks that are all better than any quarterback Terry McLaurin has ever played with. So I feel a little bit bad for Terry McLaurin, but he's certainly a premier talent. So he's a number 10 for me. At number 9, I have still just the definition of consistency, Mike Evans. This guy continues to get 1,000 yards every year. He's still getting a lot of touchdowns. I didn't see anything to me that indicated that I needed to move him down on my list. I think I had him 9 or 8 as well last year. And so he's putting up the same numbers that I had him at. And so it felt like I had to keep him in there at number 9. At number 8, I have CeeDee Lamb from my Dallas Cowboys. I think that he could be higher going after this upcoming season because he's definitely a premier talent. I think he's going to start to enter his prime at some point here soon. And, with a full year with Dak, another year, where he's now, like last year, he was learning what it takes to be the number one guy. This year, it's time to really implement it. If he can clean up some of the drops as well, I think that CD could be higher. But as right now, based on what he's done throughout his career, he's at number 8. For number 7, for me, I have A.J. Brown from the Philadelphia Eagles. We just talked about him being a very physical, dominant receiver. The only reason I didn't put him a little bit higher is just because I do value sort of the general career consistency and peaks that I've seen of the guys that I do have above him. But I could certainly hear the argument for him anywhere, probably between maybe 4 and 7, just based on who I have in there. I could hear the argument there. Honestly, like from CD up, I'm totally willing to hear people sort of shift them around. But this is just my current order. I got A.J. Brown at number 7. At number 6, I have Stephon Diggs from the Buffalo Bills, still a really strong receiver. The only concern for me last year was there was just at points where it felt like him and Josh Allen were sort of on different pages. There were certain games where just felt like he was not able to get involved much at all. I remember I think it was maybe when they played the Giants. They were beating the Giants pretty handily, so it didn't necessarily matter. Maybe it wasn't the Giants, actually. I don't know who it was, but they were playing somebody at the end of the year. Maybe it was the Lions. I think it was the Lions. And they're beating them, but the Lions kind of started to claw back at the end of the game, and then all of a sudden it felt like it was a little bit closer than it should be, and this, I think, was actually on Thanksgiving. And then Stephon Diggs, the whole game, too, had like 1 catch, and then the last drive, he gets like 5. And so the overall stat line looked like a normal Stephon Diggs game, but it just took a long time for them to like get on the same page. And it felt like that happened a lot last year. And so I'm kind of going into this year looking to be like, all right, what's the issue here? Are they going to go back to business as usual, or is this maybe something where there's a problem that we need to kind of look into? I don't know. Regardless, Stephon Diggs still had a really solid year, and so he's at number 6 for me. At number 5, I have Ja'Marr Chase from the Cincinnati Bengals. Really amazing receiver, one of the best deep threats in the NFL, if not the best in the NFL right now. Obviously, the connection with Joe Burrow. Similar to Stephon Diggs, though, I just do think that there were some games where, and I will give Ja'Marr Chase some credit because he did deal with some injuries last year that did held him out. But it just feels like he wasn't super consistent sometimes, like I have with the 4 guys that I placed above him. It felt like there was just some games where he wasn't making much of an impact, and I don't know if that was the defense scheming to take him out of it, or, other guys, it was just their day. I'm not sure. But I would look for just maybe and Chase is very young, so he could certainly, move into this, but I'm looking for just a little bit more game to game consistency for me to move Chase up into the top 4. Because I don't know, it just felt like there were some games where he'd go off for 200 yards one game, and the next game he'd get like 30. It's like, okay, well, across 2 games you had 230 yards, which is great, but maybe I'd look for a little more consistency, like I said, from game to game. Number 4, I still have Cooper Kupp from the Rams. He obviously was dealing with injuries, but man, the guy, I'm going to pull up his stats now because I don't want to misquote it, but I'm pretty sure he almost had 1,000 yards despite only playing like 9 games. He had 812 yards, but how many games did he play last year? He only played 9 games, which is pretty crazy. He had 9 games for 812 yards, 6 touchdowns. You add in 8 more games there, which is, a little less than doubling the season, and he's on pace for 1,600 yards, 12 TDs. Like, obviously not the year that he had last year where he had 1,947, 16 TDs, but still an amazing year nonetheless. And the fact that this guy has very little talent around him in that offense, and yet he still dominates with the numbers that he puts up. Yeah, Cooper Kupp for me, he's still in that top 4 range. I do feel bad for him going into this next year, though, because talent got even worse. Anyway, at number 3, I have Tyreek Hill from the Miami Dolphins, the speedster himself. Absolute threat. I don't think I really need to say anything about Tyreek Hill. I was a little bit worried about now he goes into a different offense, which is a little bit more of a run-focused, historically type of coach team. Not the Dolphins specifically, but the team that McDaniels was coming from with the Niners. And so I was worrying a little bit about that, how that would affect his production. Also, you add in Jalen Waddle as a rising talent. You add in the fact that Tua is kind of a downgrade from Patrick Mahomes. I was just worried about his production, but it was business as usual for Tyreek Hill. So he's still in that top 3 range for me. And number 2, I have Davante Adams. I mean, despite the fact that he left the Packers, went to a worse quarterback, I would say a worse coach, just in general, a worse scheme, he put up almost identical numbers to the year that he had prior with Green Bay. Yeah, in Green Bay, the year before, he had 1,553 yards and 11 touchdowns on 123 receptions. This year with the Raiders, you could argue that he actually had a better year. He had only 100 receptions, so less, but only 40 less yards, so 1,500 yards, once again, which is the second best mark of his entire career, and then 14 touchdowns, also the second best mark of his entire career. So Davante Adams still just absolutely dominant last year, despite the change in scenery, play calling, quarterback, everything. He was still really, really good. So he is at number 2 for me. And then at number 1, I have Justin Jefferson. I think this was no surprise. I think I snubbed him of being number 1 last year, which, Cooper Kupp, the year that he had, I think everybody was putting Cooper Kupp number 1 after last year. But Jefferson's just an amazing talent. He's looking like he could be the best receiver for a very, very long time with, obviously some rising names like Chase, Brown, Lamb, some of these other guys to compete with him. But as of right now, yeah, he is looking very, very dominant. And I would say the best receiver in the NFL. Some notable names that I considered but did end up leaving off. First up would be Jalen Waddle, the other Dolphins receiver. I mean, he had a really amazing year. I was very high on him coming out of the draft. I had him as my number 2 receiver in that draft, right behind Jamar Chase. So I love Jalen Waddle. But between like I said, my top 8 was pretty set. So it was between him, Mike Evans, and McLaurin. I felt like at this stage in Evans' career, he's still like the number 1 option. He still has a little bit more responsibilities in terms of the red zone. I do think that Mike Evans, he's getting older, so we could see maybe this might be his last year for me in the top 10. But I just feel like as of right now in their respective careers, I would still put Mike Evans above him after last season. And then McLaurin, I think they're both incredibly talented, but like I said, the systems and everything that McLaurin has going on around him And the fact that he still puts up the numbers he does was just crazy to me. Another option that I had that I left off was Amon-Ra St. Brown, a rising star that nobody really saw coming. Like, obviously, coming out of the draft, he was coming out of USC, like a prestiged university. So he did have like a little bit of buzz, but even then, I think he was a third, fourth round pick. So nothing crazy. And then he just took the league by storm. He was really an amazing receiver the last 2 years and has looked really strong. So I almost put him in that conversation too, but I think sort of similar to Waddle, I need maybe another year where they'd ball out and maybe, Mike Evans maybe drops out and I could see myself putting him in there. I briefly considered like Debo, Keenan Allen, some of those guys. Just didn't feel like they quite had the seasons for me to put him in there. I feel like Keenan Allen's kind of at this point starting to fade away from that top 10 range and is a little bit outside of it. Debo, I don't know. I'm still feel a little bit iffy on Debo. I wasn't as high on him last year as some people were on my list. So yeah, those guys were some of the other names. And then the last one I did want to mention that I think will be in this list after next year. And I thought about putting him in it because he had a really solid rookie season despite everything that was going on that team, was Garrett Wilson. I didn't put him in there because I need to see it another year. I need to see some progression from him in certain areas, like maybe the touchdowns. But the fact that he had the season that he did, putting up 1,100 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns, 83 receptions, despite, he only started 12 games. And they had Mike White, they had Joe Flacco, they had Zach Wilson. There was the drama with all the quarterbacks and all this crazy stuff. Breece Hall goes down at some point, so the run game takes a step back. So he gets relied on even more. I don't know. I was very impressed by Garrett Wilson. And he was my number one receiver in the class this past year. So I'm a little bit biased here because I had very high expectations for him coming in. But couldn't quite put him there yet. But like I said, with Aaron Rodgers there now, I would not be shocked if he's on my list next year.
Gotcha. And yeah, I was just going to mention your top 10. You pretty much listed everybody. Only other person that was in your top 10 last year that didn't make the list or anything was DeAndre Hopkins. And that was kind of be expected.
Hopkins is also just tough to gauge because, like, I do think that he also had a solid season, like, statistically, based on, like, the limited amount of games he did play. Like, last year he had 853 receiving yards. But he was dealing with the suspension and like his per game averages like were kind of coming down a little bit. So like his yards after catch per reception, it was a career low at 2.6. He only broke 1 tackle on the season. He did have 5 drops, which is a career high despite playing the least amount of games in a season he's ever had. So I don't know. There was just certain things about DeAndre Hopkins this year that it felt like we were starting to see the decline. And I've for a very long time, I have been a DeAndre Hopkins defender. You know this. So what did I have him last year? Like number 3?
You had him at 3.
So I still had him very highly. And I'm pretty sure last year I probably even said like, if going into next year we start to see it again, then sure, I might drop him. And yeah, this year was kind of the year that I felt like I was seeing it. The drops was kind of the thing that I was a little bit concerned about because he has long been the guy who's like, he doesn't drop stuff. And he dropped 5, which is not a lot of drops. But for Hopkins, that's a lot. Like, I mean, that's a lot. Like his first 2 years combined, he had 6. So in one game, only playing 9 games. Sorry, not one game, 1 year only playing 9 games, having 5. That was a bit concerning. And then, like I said, the after the catch stuff, career lows, yards per reception was only 8.6. That was lower than even last year, despite the injuries that he went through. Yeah, just some statistical things were occurring.